Hello and welcome to Voice of the Voiceless, Speak Your Truth. Today I'm going to be talking to Sandy and Michelle, who are both doulas. So Sandy has 37 years experience of nursing and is now a mum, a grandma and a great-grandma. 10 years ago she studied to be a doula and hypnobirth instructor and also a wise hypno instructor. So now she strongly supports women's rights to have choices during childbirth and is passionate particularly about Lotus Birth. Michelle had Sandy as a doula for her fourth baby and had such a fulfilling and joyful experience that she went on to become a doula herself and also a wise hippo instructor. Sandy and Michelle were working together in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, but recently Michelle moved to Traralgon and now services pregnant mums in the Latrobe Valley. She's the creator of the Doula Sanctuary and is an eclectic doula who offers counselling, energy healing, meditation, plant-based nutrition, guidance, and also postnatal doulaing. So today we're going to be talking about Lotus Birth. I'm going to a bit more depth about Lotus Birth, about what it is, and the background of it. Okay. Sandy, to start with, for people who don't know what Lotus Birth is or haven't heard of it before, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, certainly. Lotus birth is when the umbilical cord remains attached to the placenta. So after the baby's born, the mother has already requested that she doesn't have the symptometrine injection. Then we just wait until the placenta is born. It may take a few minutes or it may take a couple of hours. Every single birth is different. Michelle will have a story to tell you about this.
Yeah, thanks Sandy. So I wrote just a little short blog on why I chose to Lotus Birth with my fourth baby, and I thought it might be nice just to read that out.
Yep.
So a Lotus Birth to us was making the conscious choice of what was right for our baby. It just didn't make sense to cut a living organism off another living organism. How can the placenta hold no purpose? Why would it still be attached to the baby if it meant nothing after birth? It wasn't a question of why would you leave the cord intact. To us, it is a question of why would you not? Why would you cut your baby in half after birth? And when did we start doing this? In many cultures, the placenta is seen as the sibling. They have much respect for the placenta. Then in other cultures, they just cut it off a few minutes after birth and throw it away. Most of the time, the parents don't even see the placenta. I've spoken to many mothers who never saw their baby's placenta, and I need to admit, in my earlier births, I never did either. It is one of my biggest regrets. But being part of a social system comes with being programmed to just do whatever you are told. Once you step outside that box and look inside, your awareness changes. When you conceive a child, it is the outcome of a sperm and egg meeting. Together, they travel down the fallopian tube, and then they nest in a woman's uterus for the next 38 to 42 weeks. The cells continue to divide until a baby is formed, ready to be birthed. But this same process happens when it comes to the placenta. The placenta is made from the exact same sperm and egg as the baby. They form together. They support each other through the whole pregnancy. One cannot survive without the other. A mother's body works very hard to form a baby and a placenta. Throughout my pregnancy, I paid attention to both. And in my birth plans, I planned for the birth of my baby and my baby's placenta. You see, a baby is a conscious being. They are aware of their environment and surroundings before and after birth. Science has finally caught up to this fact, and many studies are able to prove this. Through ultrasounds, we have captured moments of babies sucking their thumbs, clapping their hands, waving, and I actually have a picture of my third child giving us the thumbs up at his 20-week scan. We also have seen babies playing with their placenta cord. The birth of a baby is a massive transition for both mother and baby. Just think from a baby's perspective. One day you are warm and snug, playing with your placenta cord and sucking your thumb. Your placenta feeds you and breathes for you. All the noises of the outside world are muffled, and you fall asleep to the soothing rhythm of your mother's heartbeat every single day. The only touch you have experienced is the water within the womb. Then you are born. You breathe for the first time. You feel hungry for the first time. You are touched by all sorts of things, depending on the birth you have. You hear things differently. And in amongst all that sudden chaos, your placenta is gone. Where is the cord you played with for days on end? I often saw my daughter played with her cord as she Lotus birthed. There was a deep contentment that came from her as her little fingers wrapped around her friend. I also water birthed her. I think a baby born from water into water can make the transition a little less full on, and it also takes most of the pressure off your birthing body, allowing you to breathe and surrender as your baby finds her way down the birthing path. It was a little tricky at first, needing to care for my baby with her cord and placenta still attached, but in the end the placenta was part of us. Marley and Mr. P, we called them. We spoke to Marley and we spoke to her of her placenta. We witnessed her become anxious if we were to pick up her placenta, which taught us very quickly that we needed to tell her what we were doing and why we were doing it. We also reassured her that we were not going to cut the cord and we respect her journey to let go when she is ready. We even captured on film one day. We were heading to the bathroom to bath Marley and she had her hands crossed over her belly, protecting her placenta cord. It is one of the most astounding and powerful things I've ever seen. Babies are connected to their placenta at a much deeper level than just the physical cord, and we continually witness babies crying at the act of cutting their cord. Babies do not cry for no reason. They are trying to tell us something.
So, what happens when the umbilical cord gets cut? Well, it makes baby's first breath a lot more difficult, because baby's been getting oxygen through that umbilical cord for the last 9 months, and then straight after birth the automatic cutting and that oxygen supply is cut off. So baby's first breath is a desperate breath, and that's very sad and it's very unnecessary. Fortunately, today, through education, people are learning how important it is to have the delayed cord clamping. So at least now the cords are being left until all pulsation stops, so that the baby is able to take their first breath without desperation, because they're still getting the oxygen flow coming through the umbilical cord. But what else comes through that umbilical cord in those very early few minutes? What comes through is the amazing stem cells. And not only that, the blood, it's only about 5 mils or so, but it's iron-enriched blood. And this is baby's entitlement. And for a long, long time, we have, in our society, we've been denying babies this entitlement. So it's now time to educate. And the first port of call is definitely to leave the umbilical cord unclamped and uncut, and the next thing that could be done would be a lotus birth or a partial lotus birth. A partial lotus birth is leaving the cord attached for about 2.5 hours, and of course the full lotus birth, as Michelle's been telling you about with her experience, is when the cord is left until it detaches of its own accord. And Michelle, how long did it take for Marley's cord to drop off?
Marley's took 6 days.
Right.
And so we've found Lotus birth can take anywhere from around 2 to 6 days. It definitely doesn't stay on forever. I think one of the biggest concerns people have with Lotus birth is, does it smell and does it start to rot or, go off? If you're not sitting in front of a fireplace and you don't have the placenta sitting in front of a heater, then it's certainly not going to heat up and start to smell. I personally salted the placenta and we put a few herbs over the top of it. That was because we've got an indoor dog. So I just wanted to be conscious of having a dog around and, smelling things that are around. But funny enough, with our dog Tigger, he wouldn't go anywhere near my daughter when she was Lotus birthing, would he, Sandy?
No, he would
sit
not.
Outside my bedroom door up the hallway, and my eldest son forced him to come into the room one day. He's going, "Come on, Tigger, come and meet the baby, come on," and he dragged him in. And my dog had his tail between his legs, he had his ears down, and he looked so guilty. Like, he instinctively knew not to. He knew something was happening in there, and he knew that he shouldn't be going in there. He wasn't part of that. And as soon as she let go of that cord, he was all over her. Every time she cried for the first few days, sniff, 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 jumping off his bed. But yeah, it was so interesting. And that day you came round, Sandy.
Oh, yes. Well, we haven't actually discussed the spiritual component.
Yeah.
We've spoken about the physical side.
Yeah.
But perhaps, we'll talk about the spiritual side as in what benefits the baby gets. Well, first of all, perhaps I ought to go back to the history. Let's go back into the history of Lotus Birth.
Sounds good.
It's a good start.
Okay. Right.
I have so many questions coming up.
The earliest Lotus birthing that I've heard about or read about would be in Egypt with the pharaohs.
Okay.
What I read was that they would, after the birth of the child, or possibly after the placenta had detached, they would put the placenta on the end of a spear, and then they would have a big parade going through the city, and all the people would be walking behind, and that placenta would be on the end of a spear with the umbilical cord hanging down proudly at the start of the procession, and all the people cheering, yay! So, in those days, the pharaoh was given a lotus birth. Not the normal people, but the pharaoh. So that's the first that I've heard of it. Then I remember reading a book that was written by Jane Goodall, and she wrote My Life and the Chimpanzees, and several books, another book, In the Shadow of Man. And she writes that she has observed chimpanzees performing a lotus birth. So there we are in the animal kingdom. Mammals are also performing this birth.
And we're 99% chimpanzee, aren't we? According to DNA, is that right?
So they're telling us.
They're telling us something.
That's right. And, well, moving on from there, there was a lady in America in 1974. She was a midwife, and she happened to be also quite a clairvoyant lady. And she noticed that at the birth of a baby, as soon as the cord was being clamped and cut, she could see it was putting a hole in the baby's aura.
Oh, wow.
She already had a couple of children herself, and then she got pregnant. This was an unheard of thing in America, so she hunted around, found a GP, a doctor, who would allow her to have this lotus birth, allow her to leave the cord attached. So she did that with her child, and therefore the name of Lotus Birth came into being. Her name was Claire Lotus Day. So it took on the name of Lotus Birthing. That was in 1974. About 11 years or so later, it was introduced into Australia by a lady who was my teacher. Michelle and myself were both taught to become doulas by Shivam Roshana. And she spread the information. In 1986, her older sister was the first woman in Australia to have a lotus birth.
Wow.
And of course, Shivam Roshana has gone on with speaking and writing and teaching. She's compiled a wonderful book that's called Lotus Birth, and it contains many anecdotal stories, some wonderful lotus birth stories in it. So Shivam Roshana went on to teach the women of Australia with her speaking, her writing and her teaching about lotus birth. She went on to teach Dr. Sarah J. Buckley, an obstetrician from New Zealand, who gave birth to her children. 3 of them, I think, were home births. The first was born in a hospital.
Yeah, pretty sure. Yep.
3 home births, but the last 2, was it the last 2 or 3 that were the lotus birth?
The last 3.
Oh,
she lotus birthed all of them.
Right, lotus birth for the last 3 of her children. Now, the second, yes, because the second child, her name is Zoe. And Zoe is now grown up. She's in her 20s, and she's now an international environmental hero who works for Greenpeace. Yeah. So that's how lotus birth babies turn out.